Okay, so today I wanted to take a look at a piece of software that I've been curious about. I've heard good things about it and just thought I'd get a trial version and kind of look under the hood and see what I found. And that's the DXO Photolab 6 software for processing raw files. Think of it similarly to Lightroom. And the reason I've been curious about this piece of software, other than hearing good things about it, is that years ago, in a previous version that I can't even remember which one it was now, in my early days of digital photography, I had a copy of DXO and it cleaned up those files and corrected some image challenges that those files had due to not such a great lens I owned at the time. It cleaned up those files better than anything else I owned. And that's always kind of stuck in the back of my mind that, yeah, DXO makes a quality product. And I thought I would just give it a shot. So why don't you join me? It's just a quick run through of Photolab 6. There's obviously a lot of things that I could dive deeper into, but this will give you a quick overview if it's something you've been curious about as well. Looks fairly similar to what you might see in Lightroom. We've got our folders of images here. Different ways to sort your images here is up in these tabs right here. Different ways to select which images you want to show. So basically, this is just kind of a selection tool here. Can show just the images that have been unprocessed, just modified since last processing, etc., etc. And also a little more robust way to color code the images, where on the interface here itself you have just the option of either red or green. I'm going to mark this one in green because it's one I've worked with. So that's something new I just discovered just today, that there's more color coding options, but you have to go up here. So fairly basic stuff here. It has a compare feature, so you can compare a worked version with an unworked version, that sort of thing. And that's also in the editing portion of the software as well. So, and of course the metadata from the camera, ISO, lens used, all that stuff, keywords. So in that regard, pretty similar to Lightroom. One big difference is, you notice not nearly as many modules up here. In fact, it's over here. Once I select an image, and I'm going to use this one here to go in and customize, that's all. There's not all those other tabs that Lightroom has. And personally, I kind of like that. I never really use the other modules in Lightroom. I use library and develop. Rarely do I use things like slideshow, web. Personally, I don't, and I think a lot of people probably don't. So I kind of like the streamline interface here. So one last thing to point out here in the photo library portion, you see the export up here, which is really nice. I've got the Nick collection and a tab for that right here, and I'll show you that in the customize section as well. So that's really nice. And under export, if I right click that, there's that export to disk, which brings up all kinds of the whole menu there, but also export to Lightroom, so I can export straight into Lightroom. So I'll show you how to do that in Customize as well. Okay, let's open this up in the Customize tab. Okay, here's the raw image. Again, pretty familiar interface for Lightroom users for the most part. You've got the histogram over here on the left side. I would love to have it on the right side. So as I'm working through my tonality settings and color and that sort of thing, that the histogram is right there. I can grab it and move it around in here and save that workspace. So that's all kind of reminds me of Capture One. That software does the same sort of thing, but this one, unlike Capture One, doesn't seem to allow me to move things to a different side. If I move it over here, I can't seem to dock it over there. So anyway, we've got the histogram, we've got the, we got the overview, history, presets. So all that stuff is very familiar to Lightroom users. Again, you have the compare features up here, full screen viewer, the amount that you zoom in, the zoom setting here. So a little bit different, but pretty familiar, and also kind of similar to Capture One. The crop tool is here, white balance. So all these set of tools up here, and the retouch tool is right here, and then it'll also be over here. So another thing that it uses like two different locations for the tool, which is something that I've noticed that this software does more so. Lightroom just tends to, it's in one place. So that's something a little bit different. And sometimes I forget that, it's like I'll be working over here, but I forget that I can just jump into it right up in the top as well. So just a little bit different workflow to get used to. So over here on the right side, this is where the real action is. So we have all these different tabs here, and we'll go through them. So let's just jump into that. So under light, of course, you got exposure corrections there. For the most part, the histogram looks pretty good. It's touch underexposed, so I might just bump up the exposure just a tiny bit with that. Move that histogram to the right just a little. Okay, and then the smart lighting. Actually, I'm going to shut off the exposure compensation. Instead, I'm going to try the DXO smart lighting. So that seems to... And you notice the histogram on the left side, it's a little bit different in the way it works from just overall exposure. So there's a movement with the smart lighting, kind of pulls up the shadows, but leaves the highlights about where they were. And you can see that reflected on the histogram, and really kind of just overall lowers the contrast, where exposure actually moves the whole histogram to the right, more like I would expect. So I'm actually going to play with that, I think, in this one. And I've worked this image before, but I'm just experimenting with maybe I'm going to work with things a bit differently this time as well, but just to show you how all of this works. So selective tone, these work a bit different than Lightroom for me. I really miss the highlights slider in Lightroom. Is so great at isolating things like the clouds in the sky and really starting to bring some detail into that. So that's something I really like about Lightroom that I find missing. This is just different. The sliders work differently in this. So it's taking a bit of getting used to on my part to try to get what I want out of these sliders. But that being said, there's also some really nice quality you can pull out with these sliders. You can already see I'm just getting some nice detail down in the darker areas. Much easier than I tend to do it with Lightroom. And I'll show you the comparison of the two images that I've worked, and you'll be able to see what I'm saying. So anyway, I'm moving my sliders a bit, looking at my histogram. So I can move the shadows over here, and pretty nice. I kind of miss a whites slider as well. Highlights is really more similar to that, and this is really good. You can see how it brings out the highlights, that snow on the rocks in here in Garden of the Gods, and that's nice, but it's not working as well for me in the sky. So I've got to find other ways of getting to the sky. Clearview Plus is a really interesting slider. So that's basically similar to what, say, dehaze is in Lightroom. And a bit of that, for me, goes a long way. If I really move it way far to the right, the effect gets too strong. But it doesn't have this saturating effect that Lightroom tends to with its dehaze. If you really move the dehaze slider a lot to the right, it'll your image will get really, the colors will get saturated really quick. This doesn't do that, so I do like that about it. But for my taste, I tend to, well, I'll go fairly light in there, but it's still, it gets some nice detail going in the rocks and in the shadow areas as well. Contrast is just overall contrast of the image, pretty much what you'd expect. The micro contrast is interesting. So if that slider is moved really far to the right, you can see you just get that really overdone HDR kind of over-processed type of look to it. So I found that was interesting as well. I sometimes I've done just a tiny bit of micro contrast with it. This is one that I definitely use very sparingly. Tone curve, that is pretty straightforward. The thing I find missing here, I like the way Lightroom has the histogram superimposed in the background of the tone curve. That really helps give me more information that I want. And then also in Lightroom, I'm able to, remember there's a little selection tool here where I can actually select a tone in the image and modify it directly. Here I'm left guessing. So the tone curve feels a little unrefined. I think what I'm going to use it for, though, let's just try it with some of these highlights up here in the sky. Oops, I'm trying to just drag that off. There we go. I think also I can just shorten up the curve that way, and I'm looking at my histogram. Again, I wish it was on this side, so not a big deal. My monitor's not that huge, but still, you know, the back and forth thing. I can probably, now that I've got this tone curve set more where I want, I can use that a bit, and that's working better. So, and then now I'm going to use the curve here to kind of bring out the very brightest of the highlights. So I've found that I kind of work with the sliders and the tone curve a lot more than I do with Lightroom. With Lightroom, honestly, I get lazy and just use the sliders a lot. Tone curve is a really powerful tool, and I'll probably do a video on that at some point. I think that's just a simple thing to learn for processing images. You can do anything with a tone curve, but it's not always quite as intuitive or easy, especially when you're first starting out. So with this software, though, I do find myself using both of them at the same time. But that's starting to look pretty nice. I'm seeing some spots up here that I knew would be there, and that's often the case as you start working with the contrast in the sky. Those pesky spots start appearing. So I'm just going to grab the Retouch tool right here, and you can see it's pretty similar to Lightroom. I missed the changing the size with the brackets here, but there are keyboard shortcuts, I'm sure, to do that. Then also, I'm going to move my face here really quick, and you can see this better. It's hard to know exactly where to put this window here that's not going to be in the way. I thought I had the right spot, but, you know. All right, so I can change the size of my spots, you know, the selection right here. One thing I don't like as well is that it doesn't show me where it's sampling from to fill in that spot. It seems to do a really good job on the repair part of it. I haven't really tried out clone much yet, but I like with Lightroom that you can see where it's sampling from, and then you can change that. You can just grab that and move it around. So not so with this, but let's see, I saw a little spot up there, and we'll see. I can't really tell here if that's just the way the cloud looks or it's a spot, but I'm going to increase the size here a bit and get this little spot out of here as well. So anyway, that's nice. And then one of the things I discovered with this tool, and there's a couple others, is you just got to remember to close out here. And even if you access them from over here on this side, you'll still have to close out. So that's kind of a little thing that's caught me a couple of times. All right, I'm going to move my screen back over here. Now let's go to vignetting, which works different than Lightroom's version of vignetting. You know, Lightroom's is more of a creative tool, or you can use it as a creative tool. It has some vignetting in the lens corrections part, but this really in DXO seems to be much more geared for correcting, the optics of the lens. It's not really a creative tool in the same way. So anyway, I'm going to turn on vignetting there. See, it's really just, the auto is just really lightening up the corners just a touch. Kind of correcting for the distortion in the lens. So I'll leave that. I see one more little spot up there. I think I see it. There it is. Boom. Okay. Close that out. Okay, so now going over to color. Got some nice robust color controls here. Of course, setting white balance. I'm going to leave that off. Color attenuation is setting your vibrancy and saturation. So I'm gonna increase the vibrancy a little bit, really get those red rocks. Just really get that beautiful tonality coming out of there. Saturation, I don't, just like in Lightroom, I don't do much with saturation. It can get garish and heavy-handed really quick. I like a bit more of the natural look, and I tend to use vibrancy a lot more. It's a lot more of a subtle control than saturation is, as most people who've worked, in any imaging software know. Color rendering, this is where the color profile that the whole image is showing up as, that's where you find it here. And it's a different, working profile than what Lightroom is. So the images tend to have a different look. I've noticed the tonality of the sky and the rocks, especially with these Garden of the Gods images, is different because it's using, I've got it set right now to in the generic renderings, and then it's a DXO camera profile for my camera, the Nikon D810. And then if I want to do a toning, this would be black and white, which is actually right out of the box is pretty nice. I'm going to leave that checked off. Hue, saturation, and luminance. So that's similar to, at least what it can do is similar to Lightroom. Obviously, the way the interface is a bit different here with the wheel. Again, a little more similar to Capture One. So it seems like the software has borrowed some ideas from Capture One in its interface. But say if I want to select these rocks and kind of change the tone of those, I've got my little eyedropper tool. Then you can see how that region comes up in the wheel, and I can make that a little bit more narrowly defined or broadly defined, and then actually shift the hue right here with this part. So get a little more red in there, get a little more yellow towards the greenish side. I like them pretty well. I like the rendition of these rocks pretty well. They look pretty lifelike to me, so I'm going to leave that where it is. But if I go to the white, this is basically all color channels, then I can change the color on the whole image at once there. Back to more of a selective, I also have saturation, luminance, and then the uniformity, which is a little bit different than Lightroom as well. And that's, as far as I understand it, and all of these tools have a little question mark you can click on here, and it'll tell you a bit more about what's going on. So I like that as well. I like that they kind of put in some tutorial or info right there in the software. Uniformity just kind of evens out that selection, is from what I understand it there. So that's pretty nice as well. So let's go back and let's just do a little color shift with these just to see. So if I wanted to bring in maybe just a touch less red, it's a pretty fine adjustment, but then I can use the uniformity. Let's do a bigger move, and then I can really maybe see it happening here. So it's subtle, but you just see less of like the highlight areas. It'll bring in the highlight areas of the rocks, the shadow areas, kind of even out that selection quite a bit. I'm going to go back to just maybe just a tiniest bit. I'm going to increase the uniformity, and you can see there with luminance, it really makes it easy to see what that selection is. And then, of course, saturation. You can saturate just those colors. So all similar to Lightroom, but just in a different interface. All right, and then soft proofing is down here. That is, and we have a little info window that comes up. Just previewing what the image is going to look like in different outputs. So, and then here's another little interesting gotcha. So remember I mentioned the tools that you got to close out. So as I go on to other modules, this hue picker, and I see it grayed out up here, but it says hue picker, it's still open. I forgot to close it out. So that's been kind of an interesting little catch for me as I've worked with this software. So I forget that some of these tools, you got to close them out before they're really done. All right, so going on to the detail module. So this whole set of tools is really about noise control. So got some different settings of the type of noise control that you can do. And it's pretty interesting. Haven't dove into that a whole lot, but it's intriguing. So may do another video on that, take a little deeper dive into these controls right here. Of course, we got presets for lens sharpness. So it's basically taking, DxO's info for that lens and doing some auto corrections with that. I am going to do a global, and this is just kind of a nice sharpening set of tools here. From what I've seen so far, really seems to produce some nice results, get some nice detail down in the shadows in particular is one of the things I really like about DxO. It just seems to provide a nice sharpness to the images. So that is an interesting set there. Chromatic aberration. You got a little more, couple other sliders than you do in Lightroom, which is kind of nice. So if I go over here to the left side where I'm going to see more, any areas like that where you've got this dark object against the light sky, that's really where you're going to see that chromatic aberration. This was shot with a zoom lens, so I know there's going to be a little bit more than there is with my prime lenses. I can see in there, it looks like it's done pretty well. If I click this on and off, I'm looking in the little zoom window there, and let me just zoom in on the image itself. So if I double tap on the image, we should zoom in. It's not, so let's go to, here we go, 100%. There we go. All right, now with similar to Lightroom, I can move this box over here on the left and choose what area, the zoomed in area I want to see. And it's not bad. Let's see. Let's go to chromatic aberration and see what it does. Yeah, you can see it's subtle, but it just cleans up that edge along where the rocks meet the sky. And lateral chromatic aberration probably is, I'm not going to need as much in this image, but no, I can see the difference in there as well. So it's subtle, but seems to be a nice, robust set of tools here for that. So retouch, there is the retouching tool again, and that is still open. So let's close that. So once again, you see I forget and leave stuff open. So that's an interesting aspect of the software. Of tools, there's also red eye reduction, moire reduction. Not going to really touch those in this image, obviously, because I don't have fabric and I don't have people. So, but anyway, I closed out of the retouch tool. A double click brought me back to filling the screen with this image. Now, something else I want to mention here, I noticed, which is really interesting. So you have your export options here, which we looked at before in the photo library module, and they work the same, and you can export to Lightroom right from here, which is where I would normally use it. And then also your little export symbol right there to export to different, different usages. But to get this image larger, when I move the film strip out of the way, that stuff disappears, which I thought was just a little bit odd. I'd like to leave it there and be able to leave this at full size, but small quibble there. I'm going to give it just a tiny bit of sharpening here with that. Don't want to go too much right now. That geometry, so that's where we do like the lens corrections, distortion corrections, things like that. This particular lens, This is where I'm a little confused with how these work, because while this lens, the data didn't come through, it should have been a supported lens, but this stuff is still all grayed out. So I'm not quite sure what, if I just need the brand, the most brand new lenses for Nikon for this to really function with. I don't know. So that's something that I would need to find out about with this software. It would take a deeper dive. But I should be able to correct for the focal length, the focusing distance, so some nice tools there potentially. The crop tool the controls are here, as well as, of course, up on top right here. And again, this is one that if I do go in and use it, I'll need to, it's got the little close it out feature. So we'll just try it here a little bit. And it's not bad. It's got a lot of presets here in the drop down menu. I can't see a way to create my own preset though. So that was one thing I did not like as well about this. So, and I don't want to clear custom ratios. I can set it to unconstrained. So I can do my own, but I can't just see a way to save them. Again, that might be take a deeper dive in the info. I'm going to go to reset. I like the crop as it was out of the camera. I just wanted to show that to you. And again, I've got to close it out or it just stays there. Selective corrections. This is basically making local adjustments, so masking. So this could be a whole other section just in itself, but DXO utilizes the U-point technology for masking and selecting areas. From what I've done with it so far, it's okay. It's not real intuitive for me. If I just grab on the local adjustments tool here, come in to the image. So let's say like I just want to adjust a bit in the red rocks here, bring up exposure. You can see where that selection is. So I can go in and I can paint in more here. And let's see what that did with it. So, and let's just see. So it's doing a pretty decent job. I can see where a little bit of refinement, a little work with that, I could learn how to do that. So I'm going to reset that. I'm going to do a new mask. So up at the top here, I would like to get a gradated, gradation in the sky, darken that down. So what I did is right-clicked on this control point up here, and this gives me my other options for this tool. So I'm going to go to a graduated filter, and I'm going to draw it. I'm going to go down. This is very similar to what I do, obviously, in Lightroom. And I'm going to come into the highlights and just darken them down a bit in the top here. And just see what kind of a look I can get with that. I think just a little darkening in the sky up at the top is gonna be pretty nice for that. So I think overall that's not bad. I might just feather it off just a tiny bit, and that's pretty good. So I like that. I'm gonna close that out. So there we go. So there's the local adjustment I did in the sky. You can see just darken the sky just a tiny bit. Oh, there's another one of those pesky spots. I see a couple of them. So obviously they needed to clean my sensor that day. So I'm going to come back in here and do that. Remember to close out of it. Okay. So that's kind of a nice way to do a graduated filter. Like I say, there's a lot of that tool. I really would need to dive into it more. And the last one is the watermark. So I've already added my watermark as a preset. So I just go up here and choose that, and there it drops in here. I've got some nice, if I want to change the color of it, I've got some nice color controls with that. So maybe make it a little closer to the tonality of some of the rocks to kind of blend in with the image. That's something I do with my signature in Photoshop. So I like that feature in here, having that with my watermark. I think that's pretty handy. And, of course, obviously moved around to what part of the image it's in, the sizing it, the margins, so I want to move it off of that right side a bit and move it off of the bottom just a tiny bit. So that's pretty nice. I like being able to see it here full screen. In Lightroom, it's in the export preset and it's really tiny. So I really like that, and I can adjust the opacity. So some really nice controls there. And I could update the preset for that. I don't want to update with that color though, so I'm going to leave it as it is, and I'll just probably custom do it with each image. So now it's ready to export. I'm going to shut this off just because I want to take it back over into Lightroom and show you that. So I think this is really partly where this software is interesting. So I'm going to come back in here, open up my film strip, and you can see the export here again. So I'm going to export this to Lightroom. So I really like the way this software interacts with Lightroom. You can see I get a dialog box pop up here, and I'm going to export it as a DNG format. So then it's still editable in Lightroom as it would be a raw file. So I really like that feature as well. I can include, I'm going to have no watermark in there. I guess I could have just switched it off here instead of at the watermark feature as well. So it gives me a couple options with that. I'm going to export it right there. Going to use unique name because I've already done this one before. So take this over into Lightroom. Okay, and here we are in Lightroom, and you can see here's the image that I just exported. It's interesting that it creates its own little collection basically every time I do this. So I thought that was an interesting feature I wasn't expecting. I'm going to move my window here and show you that. So you can see here in my collections, these are all the times I've exported something into Lightroom. So it creates it as its own collection. So now to see it in the context of that whole photo shoot, I've got to scroll back up and find that folder where that image lives in. So I'm going to move my window back. All right. So here it is. So there's the one that I just did. Obviously, I've done this a couple different times. I've played around with the color and, it basically in the course of learning this software and preparing for this. So, but here's the one I just did. There's the Lightroom version. So let's take a look at both of those. And I think this is an interesting thing as well. So I'm going to take this in full screen. So I'm going to disappear here for a second. But okay, so there's the image I just worked in DXO. I like it in a lot of ways. I love the shadow detail, and the sharpness down in here. I think it's got a nice crispness to it without feeling over sharpened. Now here's the Lightroom version, which is really interesting, the difference in the two. Now I wasn't trying to match these, so I wasn't trying to go into DXO and do one exactly like Lightroom, but it was just interesting to see as I work with this organically what the differences are, and there's strengths and weaknesses to each. Lightroom, my shadows, I find for myself, tend to be blocked up more, and I have to do more work with that to get them where I want. The sky is obviously much more vibrant, and it's got some nice detail in the clouds in Lightroom. I think I like the way the clouds really, I'm able to separate those from the sky a little easier. Where the DXO version, that's much more of a bright, hazy sky. But in the DXO version, like I mentioned before, I love the detail down in here. Now here's an earlier version I did in DXO, bit more sharpening, bit more saturation with the color, and I think I've even got one more that I've done as well. So I've done different versions with DXO, and the nice thing about it is, depending on which I like better, I can still go in and work with these now in Lightroom. So I can take that one I just did in DXO. It's basically still a raw file. It's a DNG. And now I can work with it with some of Lightroom's controls to maybe get the sky a bit more where I want it to be. And there's that nice highlight slider that Lightroom has that I can really pull out some of that detail in the sky better, things like that. So I love the way this software works well with Lightroom, and I can transfer things back and forth. So I could, in the future, I can foresee as I learn the software better, learn how to, say, get certain areas of, I think, are the strengths of DXO, work with it in that, then take it back over to Lightroom and maybe do my finishing adjustments in there. Like I showed in there, work with the highlights a bit or whatever, and really, work with both software. So I think that's an interesting aspect of it. So there you have it. There's a quick overview of DXO Photolab 6. I hope you liked that. If you did, make sure and hit that like button. Make sure and subscribe to this channel. It really will help me keep these videos going. I don't get paid by these manufacturers for these reviews. This is just from one photographer to another. So thanks again, and I'll see you around soon. If you're interested in learning more about photography, be sure to head on over to my website, caseychinphotography.com, and look under the Workshops tab. I've got links for online workshops, intermediate and advanced workshops, in-person workshops, and also a workshop interest questionnaire. Let me know what you're interested in learning more about. And when you enroll in one of my workshops, you'll also have access to my Facebook group, Casey Chin Photography Workshops. This Facebook group is designed for participants in my workshops. It's a place where you can share your images, get feedback from myself and others, and build community with other people who are passionate about and interested in photography.